This is Black Market Leadership, the underground resource for disruptors and status quo breakers.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Black Market Leadership. I'm very excited. We have author and journalist Ben Carlos Cleary. He is the author of Searching for Stonewall Jackson. And I am really excited to get into this discussion because I don't know if you know this, Ben. I went to VMI, so we had that statue.
Oh, wait a minute. You should have said, sounds like a setup all of a sudden, man.
Yeah, I think a year or two ago they moved the statue. So I'm excited. Yeah, so I'm excited to get into this discussion with you. Before we get into Jackson, I want to tell the audience why I made this contact. I'm writing my book about leadership and chaos, and there's a certain point where teams, I think, can hit peak performance, and once they do that, they can exceed expectations in chaos. And one of the things that I was researching and I've been writing about was Stonewall Jackson's Valley campaign, because to me, what a marvelous example of independence, independent command, what they call discretionary effort, going above and beyond, his foot cavalry. There's so many things which are just, absolutely amazing about that campaign. But I got to tell you, Ben, the one thing that really sticks out to me is his eccentricities. I don't think I'd want to work for a boss like that, and how he could get his men to do those amazing things. That's why I want to talk to you about, because he really is one of the most fascinating military leaders, I think, in American military history.
Well, I think he's probably the greatest character in American military history. Also, his eccentricities are legendary. He thought that pepper made his left leg itch. He got up always at 3 o'clock in the morning, which he called early dawn. Some of his men said it was actually the night before. And he always took a cold bath every day. And the list just goes on and on. He thought for a while at VMI, he lived on a diet of stale bread and water. And the bread had to be a certain staleness. And he would sit with his watch and time it. It would be on the shelf above the door in his room at VMI. And it drove the other cadets crazy. But of eccentricities, there is no end with Jackson.
Yeah, it's I guess so. The first question I have for you is, why Jackson? What inspired you to write about this commander?
Well, I live northeast of Richmond, Virginia, and I live on the battlefield called Totopotomoy Creek from 1864. But before that, in 1862, Jackson's army marched down the road in front of my house. And I was not much of a Civil War buff or anything. And then I found out that fact, and it really intrigued me. They say that it took his soldiers the entire day to pass by. And it's just something that I occasionally meditate on, because, now it's like I-95 or something out there with the cars and the Amazon delivery vehicles and everything else. But back then it was a dirt road, and he came down here and he had one of his most inexplicable failures. But that's another point of discussion.
His soldiers, okay, because I'm thinking right now of the Valley campaign, and I will get to his background in a second, but the Valley campaign. Am I right? By the way, I've started reading your book. I have not finished it, but I've started it. So I want to tell you, congratulations, kudos. I love your writing style. It's great. His soldiers, were they green? We're not talking. Would you compare them to a professional army at the beginning of the Valley campaign?
No, a lot of them were raw recruits, and he whipped them into shape in unbelievably fast fashion. They had to. He didn't have any regular Army people. He had a lot of his former students as officers, which was inexplicable. It's not inexplicable, but it was really interesting because they had made fun of him for his eccentricities while he was a professor at VMI. You know, they'd walk behind him. He had a very strange gait where he'd put one foot exactly in front of the other, and then you'd have this line of cadets behind him doing that. And they laughed at him. They threw spitballs and all this other. As soon as he turned his back, James I. Robertson, his great biographer, said that he might have been the worst teacher in the history of the institution. and but then he also said that they laughed at him in one decade, they died for him in the next. So Jackson was a tremendous inspiration, and they had a lot of affection for him, even though they treasured his eccentricities.
Okay, so I have two questions, and they're very similar. What did his soldiers think about him, and what did his officers think about him?
They were pretty reverent. The soldiers were. He had a black servant, Jim Lewis, and Lewis told the soldiers candidly that he could tell how ferocious the coming battle was going to be from the amount of time that Jackson spent praying before the battle. And if Jackson was praying in his tent, he would come out, and the soldiers were all doing the usual things soldiers do, playing cards, telling, off-color tales, and, laughing and joking. And Jim Lewis would come out and say, "Hush, the general was praying," and everything would get quiet.
Wow.
So they had a reverence for him. I think they had a lot of affection for him because when he died, they didn't tell people. But when they were moving when they were moving Jackson to Guinea Station, where he actually passed away, they passed so many soldiers, and they'd always ask who it was, and then they'd tell them that. They'd tell them who it was, and the soldiers would start weeping.
Wow.
Battle-hardened veterans. So
there
was a. Go ahead.
Sorry. No, I'm sorry.
Oh, well, there was a lot of very, very deep and abiding affection for him throughout the Army.
Is that true of the officers as well, especially those who had worked with him under VMI, in VMI?
He had some officers that absolutely hated him, and they got weeded out. He had an incredibly hard campaign called the Romney campaign, where they went and they had to have it was in the dead of winter, and they had to cut steps in the hillsides to get the horses up, and the horses had icicles of blood hanging from them because they'd fallen so often, and men fell and broke limbs and stuff. And then they got to Romney, which was occupied by the Union. They drove them out, and then they were going to occupy that, and Jackson left some men to occupy it, and they left. They didn't occupy it. They complained to the central authorities back in Richmond, and they left. And so Jackson said, "Well, if I can't get the support, I'm going to resign from the Army." And so everybody just went crazy. Lee Davis, everybody went back and tried to get Jackson. Said, "Please, Stonewall." He was Stonewall by then. "Don't go." So there were a few that thought he was crazy. Another one, Chase Whiting, rode up to confer with him, and Jackson didn't tell him anything. Nothing at all. And Jackson said, "Didn't I tell you he was crazy? He hasn't got any more sense than my horse." So there was a good amount of people that thought he was the strangest person on the planet, and other people who just worshipped him. But the more victories that came his way, the more people thought that he was, the best general that had been.
I don't remember what author it was, or someone made the observation, like, talk about a hell of a nickname. You got Stonewall Jackson, you have old Baldy Ewell, and you have you have was it Hood? What was it? Woodenhead Hood. Talk about an array of
I
names.
don't know that one.
He got the best of them, I think.
Well, yeah, Stonewall, I mean, is like the best nickname in American military history. You got a team of PR people couldn't have come up with a better one.
And so he got Stonewall at the first major battle of the Civil War. That's the first major battle, the Battle of Bull Run, also the Battle of Manassas. And that's where the Confederate lines, tell me if I'm wrong, were they slowly evaporating, and he brings his brigade up and they stand, and then everyone basically stands fast and stops the Union onslaught? Is that generally?
That's the story. And then he refused. Some people said he was refusing to help, and that he was like a Stonewall because he didn't send his men in quick enough. So there's a lot of controversy, and people love to talk back and forth about it. But the name, he got the nickname stuck, and immediately thereafter, it meant that he was, one of the hardest men in the world at that time. Really,
He really was the ultimate subordinate, wasn't he? I mean, in terms of working with Lee, hand in hand with Lee.
well, they seem like an old married couple at times. They could almost finish each other's sentences. They thought alike, and Jackson, and many people, say that that's why Lee lost to Gettysburg, was because Jackson had been killed by that point.
So
that's another armchair discussion for the bottle of scotch and the crackling fire.
So what, looking back at his generalship and his command, what do you think what were the elements of success? I mean, I know he was extraordinarily aggressive. I get that, but it was much more than that. But I just think the term Stonewall, the photo, he looks like an ice cold killer. So it has to be more than just, just killing the enemies on the battlefield. There has to be, I don't know, were there other elements that made him a great commander?
His wife said that the photo that shows him so aggressive didn't show him in his tender moments at all, because she thought that he was very domestic and just wonderful. He did kill paradoxically, he sometimes would want to have mercy on the Yankees. There was one time, I can't remember which battle it was, where they were vastly outnumbered, and they didn't realize it, and his men were getting ready to kill him. So he rode out in front of the army and with waving a white handkerchief, telling them to surrender, that they were outnumbered, and somebody shot at him, and the bullet whizzed by his head, and then he said, he turned back around and said, give them hell, boys. Well, he wouldn't have said hell, being staunch Presbyterian, but
could that be the Battle of Winchester, or right before it? Because I know the one before
this was up at where they got the Union supplies, and they oh man, having a senior moment here.
Oh no, it's right below Harper's Ferry.
Right.
So that's the north.
Yeah, they got all the Union supplies, and these ragged Confederates just came into upon these wagon loads of cigars and champagne and oysters and what have you, and it just ran riot through it. It was one of the most amazing scenes in the whole war. But anyway.
Talk to me about his religion, because that played obviously a major role in his generalship, but I think even the way they fought, he really was an instrument of the Army of Northern Virginia.
Well, he thought of himself. I think he actually thought that he was doing God's bidding, and he became a Presbyterian. He was baptized Episcopalian, and then he became a Presbyterian after examining all the religions. He even had a stint where he examined Catholicism when he was in Mexico, and he had interviews with the Bishop of Mexico during the Mexican War. So he really did a full investigation of Christianity, and before he settled on Presbyterianism. I think the idea of fate that the Presbyterians have played into his personal bravery, because he thought that he was not going to be he wasn't going to die before his time, and so he would ride out wherever the hottest fire was on the battlefield and expose himself in a way that horrified his subordinates, and so his personal bravery tied in with his religion, and he was also extraordinarily zealous. I mentioned that he prayed before every battle, but he also they had the first battle that we've been talking about, Bull Run on Manassas, and he sent a letter to his pastor back in Lexington, and the letter. The pastor said, "I've got a letter from Jackson. Now we'll know exactly what happened during the battle." And he opened the letter, and it was a contribution for the Sunday school. Jackson said that I neglected to, to make my contribution recently, but here it is now. So, so that's. And the other thing that's so interesting that we don't have any relation to today is he strictly kept the Sabbath. I mean, and that's not something that anybody does today, but he did that, and he thought that the Confederacy was actually going to suffer at one point because they had instituted the delivery of the mail on Sunday, and that was a sin. And so he thought that the Confederacy was really going to be in trouble for that.
So when you say his religious background, I is the right term predestination? He's an advocate of predestination.
Yes, he was. He definitely believed in predestination, although he had trouble swallowing the doctrine when he first heard about it.
So for the audience, yeah. Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say for the audience here, predestination. That's really the belief that God, basically, life's his big play, and God has set all the rules, and where you're going has already been dictated. So all you can do is live and see what happens. And it seems to me like that could be a real advantage in war, and it could be a real disadvantage in war, in the sense that attack. Just in fact, it reminds me back in around 1900, after the Franco-Prussian War, when the French started learning Clausewitz and more about the will and the spirit over the material. Like that machine gun shooting at you, Ben, don't worry about it, just charge it, you'll overcome it. And to me, it seems like it's really a double-edged sword. So that's why I find them so fascinating.
Yeah. Well, they always say that the generals were fighting the last war, both with the Civil War and with Franco-Prussian War and World War One. The rifles were so much more accurate during the Civil War that they could kill at I think 300 yards, and before that they had smoothbore muskets that were only accurate at about 100 yards. So they weren't. So the battlefield tactics didn't work, but they were still using the battlefield tactics from the Crimean War and the Napoleonic Wars.
I watched a video a couple months ago, and it was an actor playing U.S. Grant. He was reading, I think, from his memoirs, or maybe from a letter. But Grant had an opinion about Stonewall Jackson, that he was overrated. Have you ever heard of such an opinion by U.S. Grant?
I'm sorry, I can't do that. I can't. I don't know.
Yeah. So when this is over, I'll send you the clip, because it's words from Grant's mouth, but they're talking about the legacy of Jackson. And I think Grant's like, he had a small army. It wasn't anything compared to, 1864. Basically, the first several years are amateur, and then you get to the big boy pro leagues later on. That's how I interpreted what he was saying. So I didn't know if you ever heard that about Grant's opinion of him.
No.
Huh. So VMI, I want to ask you, VMI moved the statue of Jackson.
Yes.
What's that mean for the culture?
I have real problems with the whole destruction of the monuments. I'm saddened and by it. Well, you might know that here in Richmond, we lost all the monuments that we had on Monument Avenue and anything else that had to do with the South of the Confederacy. And it really bothered me, but you can't even have a conversation about people being in the context of their times and understanding people context of their times. You have to obliterate the past, and I think we're coming out of this era when we just thought that we had to obliterate the past, and I think we're much the poorer now for it. And certainly, it's not just Jackson, but they've vandalized the statues of Mahatma Gandhi in Washington, D.C. They vandalized the St. Gaudens bas relief in the Boston Common, which was the monument to the 54th Massachusetts, the premier black regiment of the Civil War. And all of this, so it wasn't just an effort to destroy the things with the Confederacy. It was a broad, scattergun approach to destroy America's past and America's heritage, and I think we're much the poorer for it now.
Oh, I totally agree. Again, as I'm going through, as I'm going to be reading through your book, and one thing that I've learned, I never really, even though we went to VMI, I never paid attention to the Civil War. I was not interested in it, and now I'm getting a little long in the tooth. I'm starting to be interested in. I don't know why. What attracts the older guys to these generals? I love it. I'm finding it very fascinating and intriguing. But the one thing that's really coming to me is, and I think this probably plays a role in Jackson, how we perceive Jackson today. I know there is a side where most people, and I am not making this argument if the Civil War was about slavery, but there's also another argument that the Civil War was about secession, and that's why a lot of these generals would call it the Second American Revolution. I feel like that's lost on a lot of people. Like, do you think Jackson was actually fighting for institution of slavery, or do you think he really thought that Virginia, all these other states, we're leaving the party, we're leaving this union?
Well, I think it had much more to do with the state. I think that slavery was the cause of the war, and you cannot get around that. But I think that for many of the soldiers, they were fighting because they felt that the land they lived on was in danger. I have a piece of property here where I live in Hanover County, and I have a Union trench on my property. The Union was right here where where I'm sitting. So they came down. They came down. They invaded the South, and I think that if there was any ambiguity in the Southerners, and that clinched the deal for them. And slavery, I think, has to be thought of as you have to realize that it's an institution that has been there since the dawn of time. I mean, slaves built the Roman roads, slaves built the pyramids. So it's a horrible, horrible institution. But in even just 150 years ago, it was the norm rather than the outlier. So, I think there needs to be more of a discussion instead of just a binary right and wrong about it. And I think that we've, unfortunately, you can't put the genie back in the bottle now. The discussion is over. The monuments are gone. Everybody's got their mind made up and they've moved on. But I think there's so much more complexity to it. There's more to the South than slavery.
Yeah. So let's go back to your book then. I've asked you, why Stonewall Jackson, but the title is, the full title for the audience is Searching for Stonewall Jackson, A Quest for Legacy in a divided America. So what do you mean a quest for legacy in a divided America?
Well, we're more divided now than when I wrote the book.
Good timing, right?
Yeah, but I guess this things that I wanted to talk that I said we have lost the opportunity to discuss the causes of secession, the causes um, of our divisions today, and just Faulkner said that the past ain't dead; it ain't even past. So you have to. I think that's what it goes. It goes for, and we need to. I just. I think that we have to recognize that all Americans are brothers and sisters or whatever that you want to talk to, and go from there. But that the people in the past are different from us and exactly like us, and there's so much to learn and examine and discuss from that. And if you just reject it by saying that's right, that's wrong, end of story, then you've lost so much of the richness of our heritage.
One of the things I really want to talk to you about is how you wrote the book. First of all, did you have fun doing it? And two, how long did it take you to write it?
It took me it took me longer to write than it did to fight the wars. It took about 5 years to write. So, and it was I was working full time when I started, and it took me about 6 months to write the first chapter. So I was able to retire a little bit early and work on the book and so forth. And that was very it was fun. I got to go out to all these places again, like Winchester, like Manassas, like Antietam, and go there and describe what it's like for a person visiting today. All history, almost all history is written. It's written as in the past, but I tried to like jump between the present and the past to give a feel for what it's like if you're out trying to examine these places yourself in the present day.
So it took you 5 years, a lot of, I mean, frankly, writing a book like this to me, this seems like it's a mega challenge because there's so many people. There's so many people involved at different spots at different times. Kudos to you. I read an article about you in the book. I think it was Richmond Times, and I think you said something to the effect that one day you just realized I got to write a book, and it hit you, and the energy it just went out. You couldn't stop it. It's like you had to do it.
Nah, no, I wrote an article for the New York Times. They had a website called Disunion about the 150th anniversary of the Civil War, and I wrote an article for a series of articles, and an editor saw them and asked me to write the book. So I had a lightning strike, the thing that very, very seldom happens. So I said, sure, and wrote the book. Yeah, I think I might, if I didn't have the incentive, that I might have given it up and go herring off after other little projects and stuff. The writers do that. We have, so have to have somebody to hold your feet to the fire.
Oh yeah, I wanted to tell you just a real quick story that was it yesterday? No, it was the day. What's today? Today's Friday. Yeah, today's Friday. On Wednesday, I have really put my consulting gigs, my consulting business on the back burner to get this book done. So I'm driving forward, and I think Wednesday I wrote 4.5 to 5 hours straight. I mean, I was I like, this is good, but I'm starting to realize something. If I don't write on a Monday and a Wednesday and have a day in rest, I get sick. So last night I actually got a cold, fever for no other reason, I think I keep driving to get this thing done. So, man, when I say kudos to you, I get the brain. You're burning so many calories in the brain area.
Well, that's true. I write in the morning, so and then I do chores and errands and stuff in the afternoon. So if I'm really going good, I can write it in the afternoon. But it's usually like a couple of hours, 2 or 3 hours at the most, where you're productive, and then you sort of hit a diminishing returns.
So you're also a journalist. You've written for, again, you said New York Times. What's this? All Things Considered, Richmond Style Weekly. So how did you get into journalism?
I went to graduate school at UVA, and I moved from Charlottesville back home to Richmond. And this was the time when they had all these free magazines that were coming up in competition to what we call today the legacy media, the traditional magazines and publications. And so they were all people were fighting to advertise with them. They all had really big books, thick magazines, and so they were copy hunting. And so I had an outlet. It wasn't like I was doing something that nobody wanted to read. It was something that my editors wanted it. They wanted this stuff, and I think that's really one thing that you need to have somebody that wants what you're doing. It's like the Beatles in Liverpool. They had a great club scene. So if they had a good band, they could play all the time, and they had a great band, and they changed the world. But if they'd just been playing in the garage, it might not have been so productive.
One of my favorite quotes comes from James Brown, and it's not show business, it's show and business. It's the creative side and the back end, the marketing, getting your face out there, your music and your work out there. I always keep that in mind because I just want to lean creative.
Well, if you're quoting James Brown, my hats off to little James Brown.
I saw too that you now you said you're retired. Are you still teaching at the juvenile? The Virginia's juvenile? It says on your.
No,
okay.
I stopped doing that. I'm teaching Tai Chi right now at and that's not the only teaching I'm doing. I'm writing and teaching. Teaching a little bit of Tai Chi, which is nice.
Oh, awesome. Can I ask what you're writing?
Well, I just finished a memoir about teaching in the prisons. I taught in the juvenile justice system for 14 years and volunteered in the Virginia State Penitentiary for 8 years. So I've just finished a book about that, and it's off at the publisher, and you can say a little prayer for me, hoping that they'll decide to take it and put it out.
I have one more question about writing. What's it like to work with a publisher?
It's just it's wonderful. I had a very supportive group of people, and they corrected me when I needed correcting, and encouraged me when I needed encouragement. And the sad thing about the whole book is my wife died shortly after I published it. And they were very supportive of me through she was very ill, and they made all kinds of allowances to work with me during her very severe illness. And then when she passed away, they were very supportive, then too. So it was a wonderful situation as far as the publishers go.
Well, I'm sorry for your loss, and congratulations on a wonderful book. What's the reception been on it?
It's been productive. People like it. I like to tell people it's been read by dozens. It's been pretty good. I've had public appearances and podcasts and radio interviews and so forth. So it's there. It's good.
That's awesome. So, so before we go,
definitely on my. It was definitely on my bucket list for life, so I did it. Write a book.
I again, I think that the Richmond article, you talked about just the elation of having that thing in your hand. To me, that's fantastic.
And I opened the box. In my living room and pulled out the copy. Oh my God, it's like nothing else. Well, I mean, as far as work goes.
Yeah, sure. Well, congratulations. Where can people find you?
I'm on bencarloscleary.com and on the web. If you want the book, you get it from Amazon. So that's where you've been. If you want to come and get a Civil War tour or knock on my door in Mechanicsville, and I'll be here all the time.
I appreciate you participating in this.
Well, thank you so much, and good luck with your book. Do you have an estimated time of completion?
No, but I do not. But I think at the end of the year, I'll have my manuscript to my agent, and I just cut out 50,000 words, which is basically
what?
I had literally 2 books here, so I cut one in half. So now I have 14 chapters, 70,000, and I got 50,000 for the other one. So that's why I've been doing for the past 2 years.
I'm speechless. I'm sorry. Just the thought of cutting out 50,000 words.
Yeah, well, but
made a wise decision.
Well, that's book number 2, though. That's a good thing. So I wrote another one. So
the sequel.
Yeah. Mr. Ben Carlos Cleary, thank you for participating in Black Market Leadership.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a great interview.
If you like this content and want to hear other things like it, head on over to the website at blackmarketleadership.com. That's blackmarketleadership.com. There you can subscribe to the podcast, and you can even create a free members profile